He wants to take over the Panama Canal. Fantastic. Let's buy Panama. That way you don't have to worry about taking over the Panama Canal.
Panama Canal, and you only have two choices: China or
BlackRock.
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 BlackRock announcing it.
quietly. President's given the speech.
To further enhance our national security, my administration will be reclaiming the Panama Canal.
Early March was marked by widespread outcries in the Chinese press over what had just happened in Panama.
Panama's promise to us has been broken. And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
Hutchison Holdings, the Chinese firm in charge of the routes leading to the Panama Canal, had just sold 90% of the ports to an American company. After finding proof of this, an unknown Chinese subsidiary shut down all the routes used by American vessels, causing the U.S. government to consider a hostile takeover with help from the Pentagon. How could all this happen, and what will be the outcome? Join us as we explore the unexpected shutdown of the Panama Canal. How did it happen? How did it happen? On March 4th, 2025, a $23 billion deal was just one step away from happening at one of the biggest trade routes in the world. To everybody's surprise, it was a deal that involved selling a 90% stake in China's Panama Port subsidiary. And the deal was so massive that it forever changed the narrative of who controls the Panama Canal, but you won't believe how it happened.
Has one of the two most important waterways in the world.
Li Keqiang, the lead CEO of the Chinese company in charge of all the routes connected to the canal, was getting bogged down by political pressure from the West and other allied nations over the canal, and he wanted a way for Hutchison Holdings to be gone from the increasing political struggle. Of course, the Chinese government always wanted the company to remain the way it was, to always be at the center of endless political tensions with the US. But everything changed when the CEO made a shocking decision. You see, not only was Li Keqiang never interested in being a part of his country's political struggles, but he and his board also needed some extra money to restructure everything in the company. This was because Hutchison Holdings as a firm wanted to focus more on other things like telecommunication and infrastructure without relying too much on the port system. And the only way to have enough money for these other investments was by giving a huge chunk of their shares to a company that had little to nothing to do with the political struggle. With all Chinese companies working under the direct influence of the Eastern Republic, the only privately owned foreign company that was ready to buy their shares was an American business group called BlackRock. This company was a major U.S. asset management body, and it wanted to grow its influence beyond owning minor shares across different North American firms. So much later that evening,
there are 44 ports in 32 countries.
After a very long and difficult conversation between both companies, Hutchison Holdings sold its Panama shares for almost $23 billion. Among the things sold within the Panama shares were the checkpoints on the Pacific side and the Atlantic sides of the canal. On top of that, it also covered at least 43 other ports across 23 different countries outside Panama. And as you might expect, China was not happy about it. On March 7th, barely 2 days after making the sale, China showed how unhappy they were with the transaction, and the backlash was immense. Even Ta Kung Pao, one of the Republic's popular news sources, publicly called out Hutchison Holdings for doing something like this. They accused Li Keqiang of choosing profit over the interests of their nation, even going so far as calling it a betrayal of the Chinese people. Other Chinese news sources called them out as well, including China's Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office. Other sources simply reposted the article across different platforms, but it didn't stop there. Things took a huge turn when the Chinese government got involved as well. While the media saw it as a betrayal of the country's values and people, the leaders viewed the sales as a threat to its influence over the Panama Canal. They were afraid the U.S. would use this as a chance to either stop them from gaining access or use their power to overcharge Chinese vessels using the canal.
President Donald Trump has said that, quote, we gave the canal to Panama, not to China. What is your reaction to that?
They needed to do something, and they needed to do it fast. So barely a week after the sale happened, several reports began to tell stories of how a Chinese subsidiary had blocked all the routes taken by shipments heading towards American vessels. And this led to many delays and service disruptions. With the Western economy already under immense pressure from inflation and corporate debt, How did the US respond to China's sudden move? Now this is where it gets wild. America's unexpected response. America's response to what happened was quick and decisive. Things got so serious that even leading authorities like the Pentagon got in the fray as soon as it came up. This happened because the president called for all leading authorities to get ready for the possibility of using the military to take over the Panama Canal. While some saw this as a good way to keep things in order, others felt it was a bit extreme, turning a normal economic struggle into an uphill military tug-of-war. So why did they have to go this far? Well, here is the thing, you see. The endless struggle over indirect control of the Panama Canal has been going on for decades, and the US had allegedly seen this coming for a long time. From when the canal was opened in 1914 up until the bed of the 20th century, the United States had been in complete control of the canal because it was very important for driving trade and moving military ships during global conflicts. This was the deal all along because the whole thing was built by the United States, and it took over a decade to do it. Many Western workers fell sick, and even a few of them died from various diseases just to build this pathway. But Panama always wanted to have full control of it. The tensions between the US and Panama reached their peak in 1976, and by the following year, President Jimmy Carter agreed with the country's leader to gradually give back the canal over a space of 20 years. This agreement became known as the Torrijos-Carter Treaty, and it kicked off a timeline of events that would give complete control of the trade route to Panama. The big day came on December 31st, 1999, just one evening before the new millennium, when the US granted complete control of the canal to Panama. The much smaller country was now in charge of an important route that handled almost 5% of the world's economy. So what could go wrong? A lot of things, and they found out the hard way. Long before the deadline came on December 31st, many leaders in the US were worried that Panama might not be able to handle things on their own. So what did the Panamanian government do to make it easier to handle? Well, what they did was shock the world by expanding the canal to accommodate the much larger ships it wasn't built for. They held a vote to do this in 2006, and when most leaders in the country agreed with it, they started building in 2007. But to the leaders in the West, it seemed like a bad idea on all fronts, needlessly raising a lot of costs and bringing in unwanted attention from other powerful governments who wanted to take over it. As for Panama, the expansion took 9 years and was completed in 2016. Now the canal was able to handle much larger ships and make a lot of money. As the Western leaders expected, many powerful countries were now looking for ways to benefit more from Panama, and among these large republics was China. This country had one of the largest trading networks in the world, and they saw the Panama Canal as something very important for most of their shipping work. But there was one big problem. The canal was now facing many of the issues that the Western leaders warned about. By expanding their canal to accommodate larger ships, they had automatically increased the cost of repairs and maintenance. Other problems, like droughts and lack of fresh water, only made things worse over the years, and this led to increased fees for sea vessels using that route, which only increased as the years went by. The Panama Canal was now under the control of a small government that seemed unable to provide everything needed for the trade route to keep functioning. Now, the one thing that should have boosted the little country's economy by a long shot was sucking the very life out of it. At this point, the future was looking grim for Panama. Not only was their economy struggling, but basic things like good roads and better transport systems were absent. The United States had left everything in their control and was allegedly not willing to lift a finger to help Panama, especially with the high fees they were charging American vessels passing through the canal. As the country struggled with these issues, the Chinese leaders had one question in mind. How were they going to benefit from this? So in early 2017, Chinese representatives traveled to Panama and approached the government with a proposed solution to their problems. And what was their proposal according to the reports? Cut all ties with Taiwan and recognize China instead as their #1 trade partner. This was a difficult proposal for Panama. After all, they had been close trading partners with Taiwan for over 105 years. They helped Panama with money and development projects, while Panama provided political support and diplomacy. Now China was asking them to forget all that and focus on them instead. This was a very hard decision to make, as China had already invested lots of money in many public and private companies in Panama, and one major reason why the economy had not collapsed was because it had countries like China actively supporting it. This meant refusing a proposal as large as this would only hurt their relationship. On the surface, this proposal looked like something they could easily refuse. But to the Panamanian leaders, it was more of a statement. Accept this, or we withdraw all support immediately.
The government of Panama is the general contractor for these operations.
Too many businesses in the country were relying on Chinese imports, and without that, the economy would collapse. With Taiwan still in mind, this proposal quickly became a choice between comfort and loyalty, and nobody was sure what choice the government would make on this. Then on June 13, 2017, to everybody's surprise, Panama made a shocking decision that turned the economic world on its head. With the whole world watching, they cut all ties with Taiwan and chose to work with China on all trading activities. In return, the Chinese representatives promised to invest even more money in Panama to help them with development projects. It felt like a huge win for the Eastern Republic, but felt upsetting to the American leaders keeping an eye on Panama. As for the Panamanian leaders, it was a tough but necessary decision they had to make so their struggling economy could thrive and have a better future. With that taken care of, China continued to grow its presence in the little country. China fulfilled their end of the bargain by building the ports and railways they promised to provide at the start of the deal. Where things went a bit wrong was when the Panamanian government refused to renew their contract with China in February to allegedly avoid having more problems with the United States. This happened not long after the U.S. Vice President visited them to confirm why they were charging American vessels too much money. Many politicians saw this as unnecessary, but to those supporting the U.S. government, it was needed so they could make sure China's economic control had its limits. The big concern among Western leaders was that even though the Eastern Republic had not built a military base in Panama, the economic control could easily become a security risk. As far as they know, if China's presence keeps increasing with nothing keeping it in check, it might be used to keep an eye on American military services, block chains of supply, and put pressure on the leaders into agreements that would strip America of all influence. So what did they do about it? First, they tried to build a strong friendship with Panama's military and trading complex. The second thing they did was to encourage other American companies to follow BlackRock's example by investing in Panama even if the returns aren't as promising. And you won't believe the next thing they did. To everybody's surprise, barely a day after giving positive encouragement to private companies and investors in favor of Panama, the Western leaders ordered the U.S. military and the Pentagon to prepare for a hostile takeover, just in case China's leaders do anything weird after that moment. We know this because, according to Reuters, one anonymous U.S. official in a private interview confirmed that the federal government had sent them a document that called on the military to look into the various ways they could safeguard American access to the Panama Canal. The second official, who agreed to talk with Reuters, confirmed the same thing, saying that those at the Pentagon had come up with a wide list of potential options to safeguard access, and one of them was to build a close partnership with Panama's military. These documents given by the U.S. government were described as interim national security guidance by the new administration, and it was first reported by CNN, while NBC confirmed later on that it was the Pentagon that was put in charge of creating options for the Panama Canal. With so many measures taken by the U.S. to keep having access to Panama's waterway, many began to wonder what China's next step of action would be. They were put in a strange position when Panama's government refused to renew their contract with China on the Belt and Road Initiative they agreed on years prior. And now one of their companies had given a majority of their shares to an American firm right before the U.S. government gave orders to the Pentagon over the same issue. And what happened next was unbelievable. China's economic strategy. To everybody's surprise, China's representatives responded to the U.S. military's involvement in the issue by taking a defensive approach. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, represented by a spokesperson, China has never been concerned with taking control of the canal. He even rejected the claim that they were interested in influencing anything that had to do with the trade route. Hutchison Holdings, he said, as well as every other trade and construction company that invests in Panama, only does so because it benefits them financially. Many, of course, found this hard to believe, but leading political analysts have pointed out that while it's natural to feel something is off about what they said, it's almost impossible to prove them wrong from a logical standpoint. All it takes is a close look at the last 10 years to see that it might be true. In Africa, for example, China has invested millions into mining and agriculture, and the same Belt and Road Initiative happening in Panama also stretches out to the suburban streets across the continent. Though most of these investments have not produced enough returns for China, the Eastern representatives have always insisted that their projects are purely economic. Where these nations get concerned is when China freely loans out money to certain countries like Zambia and Kenya when they don't have what it takes to pay back anytime soon. Some people have called them out for it, accusing them of trying to use loans to indirectly gain power over smaller nations. These countries don't have what it takes to either repay their loans or bring back returns to any of the investments put there by China. And yet, the Eastern representatives insist that the money they spend benefits everybody. This allegedly suspicious pattern is also found in the South Pacific. China has increased its presence in that region through their countless aid and loans. They even help these countries build roads and bridges in exchange for very little things, like formal diplomacy and recognition as an ally during times when it hardly means anything from a political standpoint. Things almost got out of hand when Beijing signed an agreement with the Solomon Islands on matters involving home security. Leaders in Australia and the United States saw this as a step in the wrong direction. With such an agreement in place, it seemed CCAR that China now had more freedom to establish a military base in those areas during times of emergency. As usual, the Chinese representatives refused to affirm these accusations. According to them, their security forces are only there to help with local crimes and domestic disputes. Many would have left this matter alone if there weren't leaked documents that showed deeper cooperation between the legal teams and the Eastern military. And if those sources were correct, the legal papers that leaked earlier on were only a few out of several. Beyond that, China was able to get a strong grip on Central Asia's economy through its investments in countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. Most of the rail systems and energy pipelines in these places were built by Chinese companies under the Republic's instruction. It moved so fast that even Russia's leaders started getting concerned. As you might expect by now, China denied the accusations and called what they did a business move that benefited everybody. But it made no sense to the Russian leaders because these countries had nothing of equal value to give back to the Eastern Republic. Not even Europe was free from this influence, as China provided all the money they required to repair and keep Greece's Piraeus port and other big assets in eastern parts in Italy. They kept receiving help until the Italian leaders were not comfortable anymore and started reconsidering their participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative. This pattern repeated itself once again in February this year with Panama, when the government grew so uncomfortable with how much money and resources China kept pumping into the economy. The leaders couldn't bring themselves to renew their contract with the Belt and Road Initiative and instead gave their attention to an American firm named BlackRock. It seems what the Western leaders feared might be coming true, as a lot of these countries are getting uncomfortable with the amount of help they are getting from China. The more help they get, the more the line between commerce and politics turns gray. History shows many examples of how economic influence easily changes to political power. This makes people wonder, are there legal limits to what China is doing? Well, the simple answer is yes. So let's explore some of them and all they entail for China and the United States. Legal limitations for China and the US. Even with the political pressure from both countries growing stronger than ever, the fact remains that the United States does not have the legal right to forcefully take control of the canal. Maybe that's why the Western authorities couldn't find a way around it and instead handed the difficult job of figuring this out to the Pentagon. There are just too many international trade laws and treaties that are already in place to prevent something like that from happening, or at least anytime soon. There are also many laws out there that place limits on China's economic strategy, and there are legal agreements with the West that prevent Panama's hands from signing too many deals with more Chinese companies. Thanks to these laws, there has always been a constant sense of peace and order between the three countries, even with all the drama surrounding the public waterway. Perhaps the biggest law that stopped the United States from taking over the canal is the Torrijos-Carter Agreement that was signed in 1977. America was part of this agreement, and it gave Panama the right to be neutral enough to allow anyone from all nations to have access without stopping anyone. For the United States military to step in, there have to be clear signs of Panama stopping American vessels from moving while allowing others to pass. But if that law isn't broken, then the U.S. legally has no right to take back the canal. Doing so would bring condemnation from the United Nations and build a lack of trust with Latin American nations in a similar spot as Panama. If the little country wishes, it could take the case to the International Court of Justice with help from other nations that benefit from it. And in court, the United States government would easily be found guilty. the sanctions coming after the West would be endless, and even that would not cover the other laws the United States would have broken in the hostile takeover. If the U.S. leaders break this law, then they would be isolated by all the countries in South America, especially those places that have resisted them in the past. With the U.S. no longer seen in a positive light, China and Russia would use this opportunity to build trust with these countries and make them their allies. As for China, the rules stopping them come from the World Trade Organization. Their laws stop Chinese companies in Panama from easily outshining other firms in the little country. And the idea is to make sure companies from other nations always compete in a fair manner against the local corporations. China is a part of the World Trade Organization, and breaking their laws would only do more harm than good from a business standpoint. No matter how they try to do it, Panama's local companies would file complaints with the World Trade Organization,
where a Colorado company is working on a modern facelift for the century-old Panama Canal.
and the Eastern Republic would suffer for it by countless trade penalties. As for Panama, it is limited by its laws that prevent foreign countries from controlling various parts of its infrastructure. This was why the leaders did all they could to get complete control of the canal from the United States way back in the 70s. The best thing other countries like China can do is to invest in the nearby ports and logistics without having control over the operations. The only problem, according to journalists, is that China is so good at playing economics that every commercial decision they make in Panama's favor looks like a plot to take over the country's trade. This law also gives Panama the right to cancel all its agreements with China whenever it feels the pressure to give foreigners greater control than it already has. Also, keep in mind that any attempt to take over in a hostile manner would give the Eastern Republic a bad rep on a global scale. They have been helping so many developing countries at this point, and trying to take over anything by force would send the wrong message to the countries they are trying so hard to build trust with. The other limit against China is the U.S.-Panama Trade Promotion Agreement. This was signed in 2012 to make sure American businesses always have access to Panama's biggest markets. This means that if China tries to get in the way of that in any forceful way, Washington would use the agreement as a legal way of making all American firms compete against all Chinese businesses in the area. These American businesses would have the right to step into the economy and take over with hostile force without breaking any rule of the World Trade Organization. So based on all we've looked at, it seems neither China nor the U.S. stands a chance of taking the canal for themselves. But there is a catch. One weapon many analysts believe China is trying to use against Panama and other similar regions is the debt trap. Many developing countries have fallen for this by borrowing huge amounts of money they would never be able to pay back. And legally, this gives China the right to take control over the most important assets as collateral. This has happened multiple times in the past, one being an important port in Sri Lanka that got taken over by the Eastern Republic because the government couldn't pay back their debt. Sure, there were laws and treaties to defend them, but in the face of unpayable debt, nothing in those documents could protect their precious assets from a hostile takeover. Panama could also fall into trouble if they try to stop any country from using the canal, and that includes China and the United States. The agreements they signed in the past stopped them from either favoring or blocking any county's access for political reasons. If they do so, they would violate the treaty, making it only a matter of which country would be fast enough to take over in place of Panama, and strong enough to deal with all the sanctions from the South American countries. It also doesn't help that they heavily depend on foreign direct investment from both countries to keep its fragile economy on both legs. And if it provokes any side too much, then it would spell disaster for the country in many ways. We've not even spoken about the international maritime law that makes sure the canal remains open for all countries trading by sea. What about the political issues within the country from people who don't like China as much as the leaders do? Simply put, there are just too many legal frameworks that stop any single country from taking control of the Panama Canal. These punishments are simply not worth the risk for any country, even for the ones that are taking care of it. America would be sanctioned by too many countries. China would be hated and avoided by the countries they are trying so hard to build trust with, and Panama's economy would collapse in on itself if it's found helping one side above the other. But as powerful as these laws are, they do nothing to stop the power struggle over the Panama Canal. China and America try their best to gain control through legal, military, and economic means, while Panama keeps walking the fine line between both countries. This is how it's been for over a decade, and will likely continue that way into the future. So, what do you think? Will China succeed in taking over the Panama Canal? Would the U.S. be able to bypass the old treaty? And how would Panama handle either situation? Let us know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.